The PlayStation 1 era saw developers experimenting with every racing concept imaginable. Where rally games dominated the dirt and circuit racers ruled the tarmac, a brave group of studios dove into uncharted waters, literally. From futuristic jet ski combat to realistic powerboat simulation, the PS1's water racing library offered surprising variety and innovation. We'll be examining 12 Watersports racing titles to push the hardware's limits, some achieving brilliance while others, well, let's just say, they took on the water and never recovered. Whether you're here for nostalgia, game preservation or discovering hidden gems you've missed, let's explore what made these games sink or swim. Hotwheels Extreme Racing arrived late in the PS1's life cycle, attempting to translate the toy brand's excitement into a racing game. While there was an earlier entry that was met with good success, this new title tried a different approach. While the license carried name recognition, the execution struggled. It presented a hybrid approach mixing between different vehicle and combat styles from ground, water and air throughout each race. The game featured colourful toy-like graphics appropriate to the Hot Wheels brand. Vehicles were recognisable miniature cars, racing across fantastical tracks, built from different concepts of other racers seen at the time, taking inspiration. However, the technical execution was poor, with inconsistent frame rate and basic environmental detail that made the experience feel rushed. Track designs attempted creativity but were hampered by visual limitations. The handling wasn't as good as it could have been, but it was designed for younger players. Cars were somewhat easy to control with forgiving physics, but were often left with frustration, as it felt cumbersome and clunky, even twitchy at times. However, the accessibility came at the cost of depth. Experienced players found minimal challenge or engagement. The water sections were brief diversions within larger tracks, rather than the primary focus. Hot Wheels cars hydroplaned across water surfaces without convincing physics or meaningful handling changes. Water appeared primarily as visual set pieces rather than gameplay elements. The car's interaction with water was superficial. You drove across blue textured surfaces without dynamic effects or physics simulation. This made the water sections feel like missed opportunities rather than exciting track variations. And the tracks themselves also removed the Hot Wheels trademark loops and dramatic stunts. While it tried different ideas and was visually appropriate, but it moved away from what the brand was known for, and they also lacked the refined design and challenge of quality racing games. The inclusion of water sections felt arbitrary rather than meaningfully integrated. But as it stands, Hot Wheels Extreme Racing felt more like a budget licensed product, created to capitalise on brand recognition rather than deliver quality gameplay. Young children might enjoy the colourful presentation and simple controls, but the experience offers minimal depth and lasting appeal. For Watersports racing enthusiasts, the aquatic sections are too minimal and poorly executed to matter. It's primarily notable for completeness for PlayStation 1 historians, but wouldn't be the best example of this style of game seen on the console. Sea-Doo Hydrocross launched in 2001 as a late PS1 title, featuring official licensing from Bombardier's Sea-Doo watercraft brand. This connection promised authenticity but couldn't overcome fundamental gameplay limitations. As a 2001 release, the game competed against early PS1 titles, and the comparison wasn't favourable. The graphics were functional but dated, featuring simple jet ski models and basic track environments. The water rendering lacked sophistication, with textures and minimal dynamic effects. The jet skis themselves were accurately modelled, which mattered for brand recognition, but didn't translate to visual excitement. Track environments were seen as often generic, coastal lake and city settings, without memorable features or personality. The handling fell into an awkward middle ground. Too arcade simple to be engaging, too floaty to be responsive. The jet skis lacked weight and precision, creating a disconnected feeling, where inputs didn't fully translate convincingly to the on-screen action. The collision detection was also poor. Any sort of interaction with other opponents or even environmental elements such as walls or even bushes or ditches would make the rider fall off the jet ski very easily, which would cause a lot of frustration. Sometimes even there was elements, even with branching paths throughout some of the courses where you could take shortcuts. Some of the navigation aspects to tell you where to go next wasn't as optimal as it should have been. Sometimes you get completely caught in a room or an area and you're not sure where to go next, which would literally destroy your whole progress throughout each race. It would take quite a few tries to master this effect, but it wouldn't come without those frustrating nuances. The water effects were basic, but did affect the handling somewhat, as the interaction was minimal. You would end up racing on a lot of flat plains, with some dynamic elements that would react to the environments that you'd be in, but the fiddly controls and poor collision detection didn't help the experience either. And as for the courses, they were often seen as uninspired and repetitive, without distinctive features or challenges. But the lack of environmental personality meant tracks blended together without creating memorable moments or locations players would remember. Sea-Doo Hydrocross represents a missed opportunity for licensed games. The brand association couldn't compensate for the subpar execution. The gameplay, while manageable, did lack depth. The physics felt unconvincing convincing, and the overall package failed to justify its existence compared to other titles on the platform. For modern players, however, it will only be for completionists only, looking to preserve the PS1's history, but is often seen as a disappointing alternative to other games that are seen on this list. Watersports Powerboat Racing arrived in 1998, positioning itself as a serious simulation option in the PS1 Watersports racing library. This title attempted authentic powerboat racing with licensed craft and real-world physics. The visual presentation prioritised function over flash. Powerboat models were detailed, resembling real-world counterparts, with proper liveries and body shapes. The game, however, lacked the colourful exaggeration of arcade titles, instead presenting boats as they actually appeared. Water rendering was competent, but often seen as unremarkable. The surface conveyed basic wave movement, without the sophisticated physics of Rapid Racer or the spectacular splashes of Hydro Thunder. Track environments featured realistic coastal locations and racing circuits based on actual powerboat venues. The frame rate was stable, which mattered given the simulation focus. Inconsistent performance would have undermined the precise control the physics demanded. While not visually impressive, the graphics served the gameplay appropriately, but it tried to stay committed fully to simulation. The handling model was complex and unforgiving, requiring proper throttle control, understanding weight distribution and technique for navigating waves and turns. Powerboats felt heavy and momentum driven. Building speed took time, and scrubbing speed through poor cornering was punishing. The water physics attempted realism with mixed success. Waves affected boat behaviour and choppy conditions required smooth inputs. However, the PS1 hardware limited how convincingly these elements could be portrayed. The simulation was more implied through handling restrictions than visually or physically demonstrated. Different weather conditions appeared, including calm water, light choppy environments and rougher seas. Each condition demanded technique adaptation, though the differences were subtler than arcade racers. Courses were based on real powerboat racing circuits, coastal routes, river races and open water events. While authentic, they lacked the visual personality and memorable moments of creative fantasy tracks. The focus was on providing realistic racing challenges rather than spectacular set pieces. As it stands, however, VR sports powerboat racing filled a specific niche, players seeking authentic powerboat simulation rather than arcade thrills. The commitment to realism was admirable, but created an experience with limited appeal. The technical depth and challenging physics appealed to simulation enthusiasts, while also alienating the broader audience, seeking immediate fun. For modern players, it's primarily interesting as a historical curiosity, proof that developers attempted serious water sports simulation on the PlayStation. The execution was competent within hardware limitations, but the lack of personality and accessibility mean it's difficult to recommend beyond niche appeal. If you specifically want realistic powerboat racing and can accept PS1 technical constraints, it delivers on its simulation promise. Everyone else will find more enjoyment elsewhere on this list. Dead in the Water launched in 1999 as an unapologetically violent take on water racing, combining speedboat competition with vehicular combat. The game's aggressive tone and combat focus added an interesting take on the genre. The visual style embraced a darker, grittier aesthetic compared to colourful arcade racers. Both designs were industrial and weaponised, resembling military craft more than sporting vessels. Track environments featured post-apocalyptic waterways, industrial zones and hostile territories. The graphics were cartoon-based but functional for 1999, with detailed weapon effects and explosion animations that reinforced the combat focus. Water rendering was basic, with minimal dynamic surface behaviour. The game prioritised showing combat carnage over realistic water effects and physics. This was vehicular combat first, racing second. Success required balancing speed with combat effectiveness. You needed to race competitively, while simultaneously attacking opponents and defending against incoming fire. The boats handled like armed tanks on water with heavy, responsive controls. Weapons varied from machine guns to missiles, each requiring different tactics. Ammunition management became strategic. Exhausting your firepower early left you vulnerable later. Defensive manoeuvres, including evasive turning and strategic positioning behind cover, added tactical depth. These elements would become more effective when competing in the battle mode, where you had to eliminate all opponents to achieve victory. The racing mechanics were simplified compared to pure racers. Track layouts were straightforward, and racing lines mattered less than combat positioning. Checkpoints provided structure, but the focus remained on destroying or disabling opponents. The water physics were minimal and clearly secondary to combat systems. The boats moved across essentially choppy surfaces with some convincing wave interaction. This simplified approach kept the focus on combat rather than realistic boating simulation. Courses were designed around combat opportunities. Narrow channels created bottlenecks for ambushes. Open areas allowed missile exchanges, and environmental hazards like explosive barrels added chaos. But if we look at it on a grander scale, Dead in the Water succeeded at being a combat game with water racing elements. Players seeking pure racing fun would get that, but those looking for similar elements would be disappointed. But if you found you wanted some of the twisted metal features but on water, you would get that exactly here. The game's violent tone and combat focus presented a unique appeal and created a distinct identity, and proof that developers experimented with genre blending during the PlayStation 1 era. But it is worth experiencing if you enjoy vehicular combat games and don't mind dated mechanics. Just don't expect traditional Watersports racing action. But by far its best feature, however, is its pumping heavy metal soundtrack, setting the tone for the gameplay, and honestly one of the best examples of cool soundtracks possible in video games during its time. Even if you only play the game just to listen to the awesome music, you'll be glad you did. Choro Marine Q-Boat represents one of the more unique entries, a Japanese exclusive title featuring the cute deformed Choro art style applied to boat racing. The visual style is instantly distinctive, adorable, chibi style boats with oversized features, racing across vibrant, colourful environments. The aesthetic targeted all ages, with its charming character designs and inviting presentation. Water rendering was functional, with bright blue surfaces and simple splash effects, prioritising visual charm over technical sophistication, creating a light-hearted atmosphere distinct from realistic simulations or gritty arcade racers. This was pure arcade racing with accessible handling designed for fun rather than challenge. The boats controlled responsibly with forgiving physics that prevented frustration. Power-ups and collectibles appeared throughout the tracks, adding variety beyond just pure racing. The emphasis was on enjoyment and exploration rather than competitive challenge. Multiple game modes encouraged experimentation and discovery. A customization system allowed personalising boats, adding progression details. Water physics were extremely simplified, essentially a textured surface without dynamic behaviour. This fit the game's light-hearted approach where realism wasn't the goal. The racing emphasised fun and accessibility over convincing simulation. Courses were creatively designed with fantastical elements, racing through tropical islands, navigating urban harbours, exploring underwater tunnels. The imaginative settings matched the game's charming visual style, creating memorable locations. Choro Marine Q-Boat succeeded by knowing exactly what it wanted to be, a cute, accessible boat racing game for players seeking light-hearted fun rather than serious competition. The Japan exclusive release means language barriers exist for international players, but the gameplay remains intuitive. For collectors and enthusiasts of unique PS1 titles, this represents an interesting curiosity showcasing how different developers approach Watersports racing. It won't satisfy players seeking realistic physics or competitive depth, but it offers charm and accessibility that have their own appeal. Moto 3 arrived in late 1999, after development transitioned from single track to Pacific Coast Power and Light, being published by 989 Studios. This change in developer brought significant shifts in design philosophy that divided the fanbase. As a late PS1 title, Moto 3 pushed the hardware impressively. The graphics were technically superior to its predecessors, with more detailed environments, better lighting effects and improved particle systems. Track environments showcased greater visual complexity with multi-layered scenery and atmospheric effects. However, the art direction shifted towards a darker, more industrial aesthetic that some fans felt lost the colourful personality of earlier entries. While technically accomplished, tracks felt less visually distinctive and memorable compared to Moto 2's creative locations. Water rendering improved, with more realistic reflections and convincing surface movement. The spray effects were the best in the series, with detailed particle systems that reacted dynamically to your speed and turning. The physics engine underwent controversial changes. The bikes felt heavier and less nimble, prioritising realistic momentum over the arcade responsiveness fans loved. This shift towards simulation style handling alienated players who enjoyed the series' accessible, fast-paced action. The grappling hook mechanic was de-emphasised, feeling less essential to competitive racing. Track designs feature fewer grapple points and more traditional racing lines, reducing the skill ceiling that defined earlier games. New features included customisable bikes with performance upgrades and tuning options. While adding depth, the progression system felt at odds with the series' pick-up and play routes. Unlocking competitive bikes required grinding through career mode, creating barriers for players wanting immediate competitive action. The water physics themselves became more sophisticated, but also more punishing. Choppy water dramatically affected handling, and poor wave navigation could send you careering off course. While realistic, it slowed the pace and made races feel less about pure speed and more about cautious technique. Underwater sections returned but were expanded, sometimes feeling excessive. Extended underwater sequences reduced visibility and momentum, creating frustrating segments that interrupted racing flow. Jet Moto 3 featured entirely new tracks, abandoning the classic courses fans loved. While technically complex with multiple routes and environmental hazards, they lacked the memorable personality and creativity of previous entries. Tracks felt more generic, despite their technical accomplishment. The emphasis on realism meant fewer spectacular jumps and dramatic moments. The over-the-top fun of volcanic explosions and collapsing ice caves was replaced by more grounded industrial and natural environments. Jet Moto 3 is technically impressive, but creatively disappointing. The shift towards heavier physics and realistic handling changed the series' identity in ways that didn't resonate with the core audience. While not a bad racing game, it felt like the wrong direction for a franchise, built on arcade thrills and creative track design. For completionists and Jet Moto historians, it is also worth experiencing to understand the franchise's evolution. For players seeking the series' best qualities, Jet Moto 2 remains a definitive choice. Jet Moto 3, however, serves as a reminder that technical advancement doesn't automatically equal better gameplay. Jet Moto 2124 represents one of gaming's intriguing what-if stories. A PlayStation entry that was cancelled during development, effectively ending the franchise. Development began around the time when the PlayStation 2 launched, with the team aiming to bring the Jet Moto franchise into the next generation with enhanced graphics, refined physics, and expanded content while still pushing the capabilities of the original PlayStation. The 2124 subtitle suggested a further futuristic setting, pushing the timeline forward and potentially introducing new bike designs and racing environments. Limited prototype footage and screenshots surfaced through game preservation efforts, showing improved visualizations with detailed bike models and more elaborate track environments. The game appeared to be returning to the colourful over-the-top aesthetic of Jet Moto 2, rather than continuing Jet Moto 3's direction. Several factors, however, likely contributed to its cancellation. The futuristic racing genre was becoming crowded on PS1, with titles like Wipeout 3 and new IPs competing for attention. Jet Moto 3's mixed reception may have reduced publisher confidence in the franchise's commercial viability. Development changes and challenges during the PS1 to PS2 transition often led to project cancellations as studios adjusted and pivoted to focus on new hardware capabilities. Additionally, the traditional hoverbike racing formula faced competition from more extreme sports titles with open world racing games that were gaining popularity in the early 2000s. There are some elements of Jet Moto 2124's gameplay elements that have been preserved, compared to other cancellation ports. There are some playable prototypes that have surfaced publicly online, leaving us with only ideas and development materials of what could have been. And yet, this makes it one of the more mysterious cancellations in PS1 racing history. The game's cancellation marked the end of a beloved franchise that defined PS1 hybrid racing. The available materials suggest it might have recaptured the magic of Jet Moto 2, while leveraging ideas to move to next generation hardware. For preservation enthusiasts, however, it represents lost potential and the game industry's constant evolution, where even successful franchises can disappear. When Jet Moto, or Jet Rider in other regions, launched in 1996, it introduced PlayStation owners to a futuristic racing concept that genuinely felt new. Developed by Single Track and published by Sony, this wasn't a traditional racing game. It was high-speed hoverbike chaos across mixed terrain where water sections became just one element of larger, more complex tracks. For 1996, Jet Moto impressed with its sense of speed and environmental variety. The game featured detailed vehicle models with distinctive designs that made each racer recognisable. Track environments spanned lava fields, ice glaciers, urban cityscapes, and yes, expansive water sections. The water rendering was basic but functional, reflective surfaces that conveyed the sensation of skimming across lakes and oceans at breakneck speeds. The frame rate remained surprisingly stable, considering the track complexity and number of on-screen racers. While the graphics showed typical early PS1 limitations, aggressive pop-in, simple textures, pixelated scenery, the art direction created memorable locations that players still remember decades later. Jet Moto's physics engine emphasised momentum and airborne control. The hoverbikes responded to player input with sensitivity that rewarded skill while punishing mistakes. Water sections featured distinct handling characteristics. You'd hydroplane across the surface with reduced friction, making tight turns challenging and requiring anticipation. The grappling hook mechanic became the game's signature feature. You could latch onto trackside poles to whip around tight corners at speed, creating a skill ceiling that separated casual players from masters. Mastering when to grapple, when to air brake, and when to simply throttle through defined expert gameplay. The track designed brilliantly mixed terrain types. You transition from solid ground to water seamlessly, with each surface demanding technique adaptation. Jumps were massive and satisfying, with proper air control essential for maintaining speed and avoiding crashes. While not exclusively a water-based racer, Jet Moto's water physics were ahead of their time. The bike skimmed realistically across surfaces with convincing spray effects. Waves affected handling subtly. You'd feel the craft rise and fall over swells, and choppy water made maintaining racing lines more difficult. The game did attempt realistic physics, which did work perfectly. This was futuristic hoverbike racing, where water became another challenging surface, rather than a central focus. The seamless transitions between the land and water variants create a variety that pure water racers couldn't match at the time. But as it stands, Jet Moto established a franchise and proved that water-based racing could work brilliantly when integrated with larger track designs. The combination of speed, the grappling mechanic, and mixed terrain tracks created an experience that felt unique and exciting. While later entries refined the formula, the original remains historically significant as the title that proved water racing belonged on the PlayStation. For modern players, Jet Moto showcases ambitious early PS1 development, rough around the edges but bursting with innovation. It's essential playing for anyone interested in water racing sports history or PS1 racing evolution. Just 1 year after the original, Single Track returned with Jet Moto 2, delivering what many consider the definitive entry in the franchise. Released in 1997, the sequel refined everything while expanding content significantly. The visual upgrade was immediately noticeable. Vehicle models received more detail with improved textures and better lighting effects. The track environments became more complex and visually diverse, from the iconic ice-covered tracks with stunning aura effects to volcanic landscapes with glowing lava flows that actually illuminated your bike. Water sections looked substantially better with improved reflections and more convincing spray effects. The game introduced weather variations including rain and fog that affected visibility and added atmospheric depth. The frame rate remained stable despite these enhancements, proving Single Track had mastered the hardware. Track designs became more elaborate with multi-level sections, branching paths and environmental hazards that required spatial awareness. The improved draw distance reduced pop-in frustrations, though it never completely disappeared. The physics engine received meaningful refinements. The hoverbikes felt more responsive. With tighter handling, it gave players greater control without sacrificing the original's challenge. Weight transfer became more pronounced. You could feel the bike's momentum shift during aggressive maneuvers. The grappling hook remained essential, but now worked more intuitively with better visual feedback, showing grapple points. The AI opponents became more aggressive and competitive, creating genuine tense races, while positioning mattered throughout entire events rather than just at the finish. New tracks and stunts were added. Performing mid-air flips and spins now awarded turbo boosts, encouraging stylish play. The risk-reward system added depth while maintaining the core racing focus. Water handling models evolved with more nuanced physics. Choppy water sections genuinely affected your racing line, requiring smooth inputs to maintain speed. The transition between terrain types became even more seamless, with better visual and audio cues, signalling surface changes. Underwater sections were introduced on certain tracks, brief moments where you'd plunge beneath the surface before re-emerging. These sections forced you to trust your racing line, since visibility dropped dramatically. Each course had distinct personality and memorable moments. The ice cavern were collapsing sections, the volcanic track where lava flows created dynamic hazards. The coastal route where massive waves crashed over the track. These weren't just visual elements, they affected gameplay meaningfully. The inclusion of shortcuts rewarded exploration and track knowledge. Finding the optimal racing line often meant taking risky alternate routes that could save seconds or cost you the race if executed poorly. Jet Moto 2 represents the franchise's peak, with refined physics, expanded content, memorable tracks, and enough innovation to justify the sequel without abandoning what made the original special. The balance between accessibility and skill ceiling was perfect, making it enjoyable for casual players while offering depth for competitive racing. For Watersports racing enthusiasts, Jet Moto 2 remains essential. It has aged fairly well, with gameplay that still feels responsive and exciting. The track design creativity alone makes it worth experiencing. This is the Jet Moto game to play if you're only choosing one. The fact that many of these games are getting released on modern systems nowadays highlights their unique replay appeal, making them accessible for both new and nostalgic players alike. Aqua GT arrived in the year 2000, attempting realistic speedboat simulation with multiple racing classes and circuit-based competition. The ambition was evident. The graphics were very detailed, especially for 2000 standards. Speedboat models were adequately detailed, and track environments featured coastal circuits and urban waterways. The water rendering showed detailed wave movement and spray effects, dynamic qualities making it stand out from other similar racers in the genre. Only a select few before it had managed to achieve these effects in great detail. The visual presentation was clean and functional, prioritising stable performance over spectacular effects. Weather variations added some visual diversity, though their impact was mostly aesthetic. Aqua GT attempted simulation-focused handling that required proper racing lines and smooth inputs. The speedboats felt somewhat heavy and momentum-driven, rewarding patient technique over aggressive manoeuvres. However, the physics never fully achieved the convincing realism the game aimed for. The handling demanded precision for competitive racing, creating a learning curve that some found satisfying while others found frustrating. The boats responded to throttle and steering inputs deliberately rather than arcade immediacy. Multiple boat classes offered performance variety, from slower entry-level craft to high-powered racing machines. Progression through classes provided structure and goals for extended play. The aggressive AI presents the game's major flaw, however, as it uses heavy rubber banding, leaving little room for error to win actual races in many instances, but it is achievable with some luck and patience. The water physics were functional without being particularly sophisticated. Waves affected boat behaviour to some degree, and rough water conditions made maintaining optimal lines more challenging. Different water conditions appeared throughout races, including calm harbours and choppier open water. These variations required minor technique adjustments but weren't transformative to the racing experience. Circuits were based on real-world speedboat racing venues, emphasising authenticity over creative fantasy. While this grounded approach had appeal, it resulted in tracks that felt similar and lacked distinctive personality. Memorising layouts became essential for competitive times, but the courses rarely created dramatic or memorable racing moments. But as it stands, Aqua GT delivered a competent speedboat simulation experience. It occupied a middle ground between arcade accessibility and hardcore simulation without fully satisfying either audience. The technical execution was adequate, but the aggressive AI difficulty often made it more frustrating than enjoyable. For players specifically seeking circuit-focused speedboat racing, Aqua GT provided an experience without presenting major flaws. It's historically interesting as another developer's attempt at water racing simulation, and stands as one of the PS1's best Watersports racing examples still to this day. When Hydro Thunder rolled onto the PlayStation in 1999, it brought arcade racing spectacle that few console ports could match. Originally developed by Midway for arcades, the home conversion captured the bombastic, over-the-top fun that defined late 1990s arcade racers. Hydro Thunder was a visual showcase featuring detailed boat models with exaggerated colourful designs that looked ripped from a Saturday morning cartoon. Each watercraft had distinct personality with unique designs and character. The track environments were spectacular and widely creative. You'd race through ancient ruins with collapsing temples, navigate through apocalyptic versions of New York City's flooded streets, blast through Arctic water surrounded by icebergs, and even traverse unusual landscapes with impossible geometry. The sheer imagination on display was something to admire. Water effects were impressive with dynamic splashes, massive waves that affected your racing line, and explosive geysers that launched boats skyward. The particle effects during boost activations created satisfying visual feedback that reinforced the arcade chaos. This was pure arcade racing with minimal simulation pretense. Boats handled responsively with tight controls that let you navigate narrow passages and execute dramatic turns with confidence. The physics emphasised speed and spectacle over realism. Boats could catch impossible air, absorb massive impacts without consequence, and maintain ridiculous speeds. The boost system became central to competitive play. Scattered throughout tracks were boost pickups that accumulated in your reserve tank. Strategic boost management separated skilled players from button mashers, knowing when to save boosts for critical jumps or straight sections versus when to use them for overtaking created genuine tactical depth. Jumps were massive and satisfying. Proper air control allowed mid-flight adjustments, and landing angles affected your speed significantly. The best players learned optimal jump trajectories that maintained momentum while avoiding crashes. While not realistic, Hydro Thunder's water physics were consistent and fun. Waves created by a boat and opponents affected handling. Racing through choppy water meant fighting for control. Massive environmental waves could send you flying or slam you into obstacles if mistimed. The variety of water conditions impressed. Calm lakes, raging rivers and strong currents, waterfall drops and even lava flows. Each condition changed how boats handled, requiring quick adaptation. The tracks in the game are legendary for their creative spectacle. Each location told a visual story while creating unique racing challenges. The Lost Island navigate ruins with crumbling pathways and hidden shortcuts through temple interiors. New York disaster, where you'd race through a flooded metropolis dodging floating vehicles and navigating subway tunnels. Arctic Circle, you blast across frozen water while avoiding icebergs and navigating ice caverns. In Far East, weave through traditional Asian architecture with dramatic elevation changes. Every track featured multiple routes, with risk versus reward shortcuts that could save seconds or cost you the race. Finding optimal lines required track knowledge and confident boat control. As it stands, however, Hydro Thunder delivered pure arcade joy on consoles. It didn't pretend to be realistic, and was better for it. The creative track design, responsive controls and spectacular presentation created an experience that remained fun for quick sessions or extended play. The boost management system added enough depth to maintain interest beyond initial novelty. For Watersports racing fans seeking arcade thrills, Hydro Thunder is essential. It has aged remarkably well because it never relied on realistic simulation. It embraced arcade spectacle completely. The PS1 port managed to capture the arcade's energy successfully, making it one of the best watersports racers on the platform. Released in 1997, Rapid Racer, also known as turboprop racing, represented one of the more realistic approaches to powerboat racing on the PlayStation. Developed by Sony Computer Entertainment, this title prioritised authentic wave physics and realistic handling over arcade chaos. Rapid Racer featured clean, functional graphics that emphasised clarity and visual spectacle, being seen as some of the most visually impressive for its time on the console. The powerboat models were detailed and realistic, resembling actual watercraft rather than futuristic concepts. Track environments showcased natural water locations, tropical beaches, rocky coastlines and urban harbours with understated beauty. The water rendering was technically impressive for 1997. The wave physics system created convincing swells and troughs that visibly affected your craft's movement. Watching your boat rise and fall over waves while spray kicked up realistically demonstrated impressive attention to detail. The colour palette was bright and inviting without being garish. Weather effects including changing lighting conditions added visual variety across races, and the frame rate remained stable even when multiple racers competed in choppy water conditions. This is where Rapid Racer distinguished itself. The handling model prioritised realistic jet ski physics over arcade accessibility. Your craft responded to wave conditions dramatically. Cresting a wave meant a brief loss of traction, dropping into troughs affected your speed, and choppy water made maintaining racing lanes genuinely challenging. Weight transfer mattered significantly. Aggressive turning could flip your boat if executed carelessly, especially when hitting waves at odd angles. This created a learning curve that frustrated casual players but rewarded those willing to master the physics, and these physics were its standout feature. The water wasn't just a textured surface, it behaved as a dynamic reactive element that fundamentally affected gameplay. Learning to read wave patterns and time your movements accordingly became essential for competitive racing. Different water conditions appeared throughout the races. Calm sections allowed for maximum speed, while choppy areas demanded technique and patience. The transition between conditions created rhythm changes that kept races engaging. Environmental hazards included rocks, buoys, and other watercraft that required navigation. Collisions were impactful. Hit something at speed and you'd cartwheel spectacularly while your opponents pulled ahead. The track designs emphasised natural water environments rather than fantastical locations. Courses wound through realistic settings with elevation changes, narrow passageways and open water sections that showcased the wave physics. While less imaginative than titles like Hydro Thunder, they felt authentic and appropriately challenging. Multiple routes existed but were subtly integrated rather than obvious branching paths. Discovering shortcuts required exploration and environmental awareness. But as it stands, Rapid Racer succeeded as a more realistic alternative to arcade watersport racers. The authentic wave physics and challenging handling created a satisfying simulation experience for players seeking depth over immediate accessibility. It never achieved the commercial success of flashier competitors, partly because of its extreme difficulty and simulation approach had narrower appeal. For more modern players interested in watersports racing variety, this game demonstrates that the PS1 could handle sophisticated physics simulation alongside its arcade spectacle. It's a hidden gem worth discovering if you can source a copy or explore emulation options. The realistic approach creates a distinctly different experience from other entries on this list. Games like Jet Moto and Rapid Racer showed developers learning PS1 capabilities. Basic water rendering with limited dynamic effects, but creative track design compensated for technical limitations. Titles like Hydro Thunder and Jet Moto 2 demonstrated mastery of the hardware, with sophisticated water physics, detailed environments and stable performance. Visual creativity peaked with fantastical track designs and memorable locations. But during the late era, final releases showed diminishing returns. Technical improvements were minimal, while artistic vision often declined. Games felt dated compared to early PS2 titles, though emerging simultaneously. The best looking games prioritised stable frame rate, clear visibility and satisfying visual feedback over raw polygon counts. Spectacular water effects and creative environments mattered more than realistic textures. The PS1 Watersports racing library split between arcade accessibility and realistic simulation. Both approaches found audiences, proving the market supported variety. Early titles treated water as textured surfaces. Advanced games like Rapid Racer modelled waves dynamically, affecting handling. The best implementations made water feel reactive and important rather than decorative. Successful games prioritised responsive controls that gave players confidence. Floaty disconnected handling created frustration, while tight immediate feedback encouraged mastery. But these PS1 Watersports racers pushed hardware with dynamic water rendering, complex physics calculations and creative track designs. These achievements demonstrated the console's capabilities while establishing techniques that benefited future generations. And this selection of games also represents a fascinating experimentation during an era when developers were still discovering what worked in 3D gaming. From Jet Moto's futuristic hoverbike skimming across mixed terrain, to Hydro Thunder's spectacular arcade chaos, from Rapid Racer's realistic wave physics to Dead in the Water's combat-focused mayhem, the platform offered remarkable variety. It was an era where innovation flourished, that encouraged experimentation, resulting in diverse approaches to water sports racing that modern games' focus-tested elements rarely permits. It also presented technical creativity, seeing developers push the hardware limitations, achieving sophisticated water effects and physics that remain impressive decades later. It also offered up lots of gameplay variety. The split-screen arcade thrills and simulation depth meant players could find experiences matching their preferences, from immediate fun to challenging mastery. And the best games created spectacular, unforgettable moments. Whether Hydro Thunder's explosive jumps, Jet Moto 2's volcanic tracks or Rapid Racer's wave-riding challenges, games embraced their identity and it succeeded. Hydro Thunder never pretended to be realistic and became arcade perfection. Rapid Racer committed to simulation and created an authentic challenge. Jet Moto 2 balanced both philosophies masterfully. Responsive controls, creative track design and meaningful water interaction separated great water racers from forgettable ones. The best titles made water feel essential rather than decorative. But if we also look at what failed, games that lacked creative identity or commitment struggled. Mediocre execution of licensed properties disappointed. Technical ambition without gameplay refinement felt hollow. Poor water physics undermined a game supposedly centred on aquatic racing. When water felt like texture surfaces rather than dynamic environments, the entire premise collapsed. But either way you look at it, these PS1 Watersports racers influenced future generations. The Jet Moto series paved the way for futuristic racing games that mix terrain types. Hydro Thunder's arcade spectacle influenced modern arcade racers, and Rapid Racer's wave physics demonstrated what realistic water simulation could achieve. More importantly, the improved water racing could work as a standalone genre, rather than just a variation of traditional racing. The variety of successful approaches showed that there wasn't one correct way to design these type of games. The best games in this genre remain genuinely fun and worthwhile, and in many ways have aged remarkably well, offering gameplay that still feels responsive and exciting, which provides a historical insight into early realistic water physics implementation. Even the lesser titles do offer some value for game preservation and understandings of the PlayStation's hardware development evolution. They show what developers attempted, where they succeeded, and why some approaches worked while others failed. But all of these elements combined represented an era of fearless experimentation, where developers tried wildly different approaches to see what resonated. Some created arcade masterpieces, while others attempted serious simulation, and a few blended genres in unexpected ways. Not every experiment succeeded, but the willingness to try created a diverse, fascinating library that remains interesting to explore decades later. These games remind us that gaming's golden ages aren't just about the champions we remember. They're also about the brave experiments, the creative risks, and the innovative ideas that push the medium forward. But the most interesting aspects will be to learn what your favourite games are from this list. Which ones did you like the most? Which did you think were the most disappointing? And which are just your genuine favourite overall? So be sure to drop a comment down below and let us know what obscure titles you'd like to see covered next. Also be sure to like, hype and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten classics, preservation efforts and documenting gaming history on the PlayStation, and celebrations of titles that define the generation. Also, if you're interested in supporting the channel, be sure to check out my Patreon page for exclusive early access to videos, behind the scenes content, member live streams and deeper explorations of the PlayStation's incredible library. And until next time, keep those jet skis fueled, those boats afloat, and most importantly, keep those gaming memories alive.